Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Oh, happy Tuesday, everyone. Happy Tuesday, Dan Kent. Good to see your face. Welcome to the newscast, and thank you for being here with us. That's Dan Kent. I'm Shawna Boren. Dan, did you get a haircut?
I did get a haircut. Yep.
Nice.
Yeah, it's one of those things too, where this time of year you have to plan it all out because you've got, well, first of all, I have a sermon coming up, so I wanted to make sure I timed it right. And you want to time it right where it's like, you want to give your hairstylist the opportunity to screw up. So if they screw up the haircut, you need to give yourself some time to grow some of that hair back, But my hair
recovery time.
That's right, recovery time. But she's awesome, so I'm usually not worried about that. And then you got to time it with Thanksgiving. So I already planned my next haircut before Thanksgiving, and then you also have to plan ahead for it. Like if you have a hairstylist, you have to book that time. And this is like a free advice for you people who are watching. Don't forget to book your holiday haircuts because your hairstylists are going to be booked quick.
I love it. We try to take care of the whole person here on the newscast. So
that's right.
I second what Dan said. Get those appointments in because they're gonna get booked up, and you're gonna be looking wretched if you don't. Just kidding. Yeah. You guys look amazing always. All right, so Dan, you are preparing because you got something coming up that it's going to be great. We're starting a new series, but before we get to that, we do have to kind of what we call button up.
Yeah.
Cross-examination. I was gonna say CrossFit, but that's not what's in the series. Cross-examination, right? So Greg kind of gave us the final sermon from that portion of the series, and then we're moving on to another series.
That's right.
So it is summary time. It is time for you to let us know what we have to look forward to. How do you want to close out this portion of the series, Dan?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Greg, I thought did a great job of just putting a bow on this series on judgment. And all of this sort of emerged from the first section of Matthew chapter 7, basically 1 through, I think, 9. So he sort of put a bow on the series, which has gone on now for 2.5 months, I think. We've been kind of chipping away at this, and I thought it was a great way to end it. He's kind of talked about a lot of different things in this series, having to do with anything from judging others to climate change to the final judgment to the apocalypse. And we had Jim Bilby come in and talk about a post-death opportunity for salvation and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of territory. We wandered into territory that we don't really talk about a lot at the church. And so it was kind of neat to kind of explore some of those less attended topics. But Greg kind of looked at the day of revelation or the day of judgment, this idea that at some point we will kind of face God, and that's going to have implications on who we are and kind of like what we've done with our lives and so forth. And so he starts off by talking about this idea that in Jesus, God lays this foundation for us, and there is no other foundation for us other than the foundation that Jesus laid, and that everything that does not conform to that foundation, which is other-oriented love, everything else that's not other-oriented love is just sort of a false reality, because the reality is that the universe is created by this other-oriented, loving, agape-loving God, and everything else is just not reality. It's a lie. And so what Greg argues is that at some point, as we live our lives, and we, just like Adam and Eve, and just like so many people before us, we get tempted to live into these kind of pseudo realities or these unrealities. And basically, Greg argues that all of sin is to live in unreality. You can't sin without pretending that God is not real. In order to sin, you have to pretend that God is not real. And in other words, you live in unreality, and that's what sin is. And so, what happens is that we build this character on these unrealities, and those unrealities are not compatible with the reality, which is the foundation that we find in Christ, which is other-oriented love. And so in order for us to live in reality, we have to have all of our unrealities burned away. We have to be refined. We have to be perfected. And so some of the imagery that the Apostle Paul uses is that we go through this fire, and everything that's compatible with Jesus, the foundation that Jesus lays, are like gold and silver and precious stones. And everything that's built on unreality is sort of like hay and wood and straw, and it just sort of burns away. But all of this experience of facing God, of experiencing God's love, this perfecting fire of God's love, ultimately it just reveals us for who we really truly are, what we've actually done with our lives and our character. And that's sort of what the fire does, is it reveals us. It reveals us as we actually are. And that's ultimately, Greg argues, for our benefit, because if God does everything out of other oriented love, well, God's judgment is also kind of meant for other oriented love. The judgment is meant to make us so that we can enter into God's kingdom, to burn away everything that's not compatible with God's kingdom, so that we can enter the party. And so, even though it might be scary, it's ultimately good, because it's what makes us compatible. Now, there's a couple ideas that we can kind of think about, like, how do we become perfected, and how do we become compatible with God's kingdom? And Greg explores these. The first option is that God just does it. God just makes us perfect, and so that we can enter right away, and it's just sort of a snap of the fingers. Or Greg proposes this alternative, which is that we have to participate in this, because if God does it, then it's not really my character, and it sort of defeats the purpose of having free will and all of that. And Greg sort of thinks that whatever the refining process is, we have to play a central role in that. Otherwise, it's not ours. We lose our autonomy. And so what Greg says is that we should kind of start this self-refining now. We should start making ourselves compatible with the foundation that is Jesus Christ now, because the Bible seems to indicate that it's easier to do it now than it will be later on. And to live more and more and more into that reality, to live, as Greg says, to live in the light, to live where things are kind of revealed, where you become more and more in touch with who you really are, and you speak truthfully, even if that truthfulness might not be comfortable. It's still true, it's still right. And he uses the example of Job, and how God appreciated Job's straight talking, or his truthfulness and his honesty, even when Job was saying things that might not have been complimentary of God. That's what it means to live in the light, to just live truthfully and to live honestly, as we become more and more Christ-like. And so that's how he ends this long series on judgment. And I thought it was a great way to end the series. What did you think of his sermon?
Yeah, I too thought it was a good way to end the series. I couldn't help but reflect on the series as a whole. I really did like ending it. Okay, first of all, this sermon, I did appreciate ending it with this challenge just to live honestly and truthfully as much as we can, and that God's not scared of our honesty or our truthfulness, even if it isn't packaged pretty. God's not scared of that. And so I really appreciated that. What I appreciated with the series as a whole was that it definitely caused a lot of conversations to happen amongst our people, and just even the ideas for people to share. And I know that people have had conversations in the gathering groups, and you and I have had conversations, and we've gotten in questions. I just feel like this is something that, you're right, our church hasn't spent a ton of time previous to this diving into, and we definitely like deep dove during the last several weeks, a couple of months, however you want to put it. And I think it was really just caused a lot of people to think and have some good conversations. We did get a question in though. And that's the beauty of, I think, being a part of Woodland Hills, because not everyone is going to hear something the same and think the same as you or I or, Sally next door or whatever. Like, and that's something that we've always encouraged, is like thinking for yourself and asking those questions. And so as you and I are saying, how much we appreciated this conclusion sermon to this judgment series, we did have a question come in. I'm just, thank you for your candor, for someone who said that that they really struggled with Sunday sermon, Dan, and they found it to be kind of depressing, and some old tapes are playing in their brain about, you have to do more and try harder and be more disciplined in order to please God. And so for anyone else out there that maybe heard this sermon and that's kind of what landed with them, what could you say? What do you have to say to help them as they're wrestling with that?
Do you know what her struggle was with the verse or with the teaching?
So let's see. She says, okay, so again, she thought it was depressing and confusing. The content felt like old evangelical tripe I still hear in my old tapes. Stuff like I said, you must do more, try harder, be more disciplined in order to please God. I am personally looking forward to perfect coercive conformity at death, knowing that His love and empowerment has given me the deep desire to walk the path with Him here on earth.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So I think the sense that I get is that it sounds like I think it was a she, you said. I think she is probably reacting to this idea that we have to participate, we have to work, to kind of become more Christ-like. And I think I get that a lot in the church, where there's almost every time I preach a sermon, someone will come up and say, you mean God does that, right? Like there's like this reaction, like, God does that, right? And I think there is a justified reaction that people have, because there's a lot of cults. There's a lot of times in Christian history where church has become sort of this place where you have to earn your salvation, and you have to do things to be saved. And it's sort of like this. In fact, sometimes there's even like a ladder of accomplishments that you have to go on, and there is sort of like this. You have to earn it. And so there's a reaction to that towards God's grace, where people say, no, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to earn anything. And so you don't have to do anything, and God does it all for you. And that's sort of like the swinging the other way. It's tough though, because even though the Apostle Paul does talk about grace, and he says you cannot earn your salvation, there are times when he says you have to work out your salvation in fear and trembling. And so there is this work part of it. And so the way I've kind of made sense of this is that salvation is something that we cannot earn. There's nothing that we can do that will merit our salvation. That's just something that God gives us as a gift. But that doesn't mean that we don't have anything to do. Hold on, we have this emergency that's really annoying me. Hold on. Ever since I have Apple now, like every time somebody is speeding on the freeway, I get these alarms going off. But anyway, really, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, God. So the question is about earning salvation. You can't earn it, of course, but that doesn't mean that we can't do anything. It doesn't mean that there's nothing for us to do. In fact, every time when you look at like the big kind of popular verses that talk about our transformation and seeing the light and so forth, like for instance, Romans 12:2 that says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, verse 12:1 says, offer yourself to God, and then you will be transformed by the renewing of your mind. There's this thing that we have to do, and then we will be transformed. Another one is, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Well, that's great. But if you look at the verse before it, Jesus says, if you keep my commands, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The Great Commission, this is Jesus's final sort of command to the disciples, found at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. He tells them to go and baptize the world in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and to teach people how to obey the commands that I have given you. And so, our salvation is this gift. It's a free gift. It's something that we cannot earn, but there's still expectations that God has for us. He gave us a person. He gave us a personhood, and he wants us to learn how to be a godly person. He wants us to learn how to be compatible with his kingdom, and he wants us to own it because it's ours. He gave it to us. It's not something that God wants to micromanage for us, because then you couldn't have a genuine relationship. And so that's what I would encourage people to think about who share some of those struggles. It's true that you cannot earn salvation, but and there are definitely times when church has gone so far in like works-based righteousness and trying to accomplish all of these things to please God, and that's definitely destructive. But it's also destructive to swing the other way and to assume that God does everything, because I just don't think that you can back that up biblically. So that's what I would say. It's a great question, and I'm so glad that you sent it in. Thank you for sending it in.
Yeah. Again, thank you for your vulnerability and candor with that. I think the way I've worked that out, because I think as old as time, there have been these conversations about faith versus works versus grace, and I agree with everything that you said. Like, there have been times and periods within church history where the works have been highlighted, and people have kind of had a standard to try to like get in and get higher on the ladder and all that stuff. But salvation is free. It is a gift from God. However, when we get that salvation, that free salvation, that gracious gift, it opens the door to a relationship. And so I do agree that as we grow in our relationship with Christ, hopefully it is transforming our behaviors, it's transforming our heart, it's transforming our attitudes, our thought process, it's transforming how we engage with others and treat others, and creation, all of it. I happen to look at it as a growth of relationship, not necessarily doing all the right and avoiding all the wrongs, but it's just us growing in our relationship, just like we do with our family or our spouse or our kids or whatever. Like, it's not just a one time, like, hey, thanks for this relationship, and then we go about our separate ways. No, like, we grow together and hopefully my love grows, and that impacts the way that I interact in the space. So thank you for sending that question. I really appreciate it. And I think that's a great way to wrap up this series, Dan. It's a great way to wrap up this MuseCast. Do you have a nugget for the people as we put a bow on judgment and all of it? Various streams.
I wrote this down. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. Oh yeah. Here it is. Okay, so Greg had just mentioned, and I just grabbed a piece of paper to write this down, but he had mentioned how when he said that you have to lock this in, that God's judgment is for our benefit, and he said that a lot of people don't assume that, and I think that he's right, because I think that a lot of people bring a different picture of God to everything, and that shapes our picture of God, shapes how we're going to understand God's judgment and how we're going to understand this day of judgment or this day of revelation. And I, in my experience, I've noticed that some people have, like, for instance, and there's more options than this. There's a wide variety of pictures of God that we can bring to this issue, but one that I've seen is this idea that God's judgment is sort of kind of intended to teach us a lesson, or to punish us, or to kind of make us feel the consequences of our sin. And I think the picture of God that's associated with that, and I've seen this in people's life. This is kind of like the angry driver who, he wants to teach you a lesson, and the only lesson that's being taught by these angry drivers who try to cut you off and stuff like that is that they feel like they need to redeem their dignity. They feel like they've been belittled by how you were too close to them or something like that, and they get very angry and they teach you a lesson. And it almost always has to do with, you can't treat me like this. And there's like this vulnerability, there's this insecurity that they have, and so they try to redeem that. Well, God's not like that. God's profoundly secure. God is omni-secure. That God's not like, he doesn't need to redeem himself to us. He doesn't need to teach us a lesson. Everything that he does is for our benefit, not for him. And so I would encourage people to think about, like, if you struggle thinking about these topics, think about, how does your picture of God shape your fears and your emotions around this topic? Because I think that if you have fears and emotions around this topic of the final judgment and so forth, that's like a little light on your dashboard saying, oh, you need to check your picture of God here. Because if God is the way that God is revealed in Jesus Christ on the cross, well, you shouldn't have anything to be afraid of here. You should have hope, you should have anticipation, you should have excitement for what God is promising to do in your heart and in your character and in your life. And so I guess that would be my nugget.
I like it, Dan. And I'm just going to piggyback on that. Like, it's not Jekyll and Hyde, right? Like, if God is altogether lovely and loving and others oriented, as we see in Jesus on the cross, he's not all of a sudden going to flip a switch.
That's right.
And become
Yeah.
like it's not. Yeah. He's going to continue to be that, and that may mean, most likely will mean, there will be things from us that he needs to purge from us because it doesn't align with his character, and even that is an act of love. And I would just encourage, as Dan said about picture of God, that is so foundational. Trust the love that God has for you. Mm-hmm. Allow it to fully fill you and to inform your thoughts about him, and also your thoughts about yourself, and then how you move about your space in the world. Allow his perfect love for you inform how you engage with yourself, with him, with others, with this space that we occupy, and just see how he might move in fresh and beautiful ways. That's the nugget.
That's well put. God is not Jekyll and Hyde. That's right.
It's not. All right, Dan, well, I'm looking forward to this next series. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation and meeting back up here next Tuesday and just digging a little deeper